every Saturday, I get a very special WhatsApp message. Can you guess who that WhatsApp message is from?
I'm hoping it's from us.
Of course, the continent. Summit Allison, thank you so very much for joining us here on CheckPoint, the podcast. You're, of course, the co-founder of this incredible paper that I want you to talk to us about. Number one, there's a sense that South Africans are not really interested in what's going on beyond their borders. I guess we've got a lot on our plates right here. But I think another thing that people don't realize is how expensive it is to cover the continent. And also the red tape. I mean, some of these countries you can't actually enter. Burkina Faso, not very easy. Ethiopia, you've got to declare your intentions. And when you do, 9 out of 10 is that the governments won't allow you, won't give you the accreditation. So that's why I'm quite interested in your model of the continent. Just tell us a little bit about how it started, why it started, and how it works.
So we started in 2020, in around March, April. And I don't know if you remember, you may have tried to erase this period from your brains. This was the beginning of the pandemic. And at the time, I was working at the Mail and Guardian as their Africa editor. And I was reading a lot of international news about the pandemic and what was going on, and feeling very unsatisfied with the way that Africa was being covered in international headlines about COVID, and thinking, well, actually, that doesn't line up with what I'm seeing, with what my network of journalists on the ground in various African countries are reporting to me. And it just felt like international media was missing a trick when it came to the impact of COVID on Africa and how we should be kind of responding. And so a few colleagues of mine and myself decided to do something about it. We thought, okay, let's start a newspaper where, initially we were really focusing on pandemic coverage, where we try and write about this huge international story from the perspective of an African audience, with African journalists at the forefront. And that was our first kind of thing we wanted to achieve. But the second was, okay, if we want to do this, where is the best place to put this news? And it was actually a family member of mine, very, very well-meaning, who kept sharing fake news on WhatsApp in the family groups.
There are many of those.
Many of those.
In many families.
I think every family has that person who is the connector and who is the information sharer and who wants to share information and keep their relatives informed. It's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful thing. The problem is we're not designing news for that person. So on WhatsApp, which is the main communication platform that we all use in our day-to-day life, news organizations are not putting information onto WhatsApp in a format that's, easily shareable on WhatsApp.
Yeah, and a lot is being shared.
A lot is being shared. And you know what? You know who is putting information on WhatsApp? Fake news, disinformation. People with malicious agendas understand where to put information to make it spread fast, but news organizations didn't. And so we thought, let's design a product that can work on WhatsApp. And our inspiration actually was a Zimbabwean newspaper called 263 Chat. And that had started as a Twitter space and then turned into a closed WhatsApp group where people would just chat. And eventually the founder of that WhatsApp group thought, let me just make a PDF with the headlines and some stories. And that turned into a PDF newspaper called 263 Chat. And we thought, oh, that is brilliant. We're going to, be inspired by that model and create our own PDF newspaper designed to be shared on WhatsApp and similar platforms that puts African journalism for African audiences at the very heart of the journalism model.
You didn't think money? How am I going to finance this ambitious goal?
I didn't think money.
Great.
Because it felt like at that point, the need was so pressing. The first couple of big examples of the kind of early coverage we did was the president of Madagascar at the time, Andry Rajoelina, had launched a energy drink, which he claimed was going to cure COVID.
Yeah.
And so one of our first stories was an article where we were able to, debunk the claims made in this energy drink and say, don't drink this.
Yeah.
Another one a little bit later on was Tanzania, the president of Tanzania, basically saying that COVID didn't exist in his country. And we were able to send a reporter to hospitals, to morgues, to speak to doctors and be like, well, no, COVID most certainly does exist. And those huge pressing public health matters is why, journalism was important. And so we felt that we just had to figure out a way to do it and then hope and pray that the financing would sort itself out in the end. And you know what? It did.
Tell me about your model. It's very interesting because, as I said, it's very expensive to travel on the continent, to stay on the continent. Even some of the stringers that we use on the continent are more expensive than somebody that you would hire here in South Africa because of fuel costs. And, just the cost of living is so high. So tell me about your model.
So we are primarily donor funded. But what's interesting is we have not really had to go looking for donors or go actively fundraising, because what's tended to happen is people who are reading the continent are the ones who have come to us and say, hey, I am a grant officer at this, philanthropy. Let's chat. Let's make a plan, because we see the value in what you do.
It's selling itself.
It has been selling itself. And that's been really, really interesting. One of the
the journalists themselves?
We work with a big network and we pay them. We don't believe in unpaid work. And because of the philanthropic support, we have been able to pay them fairly. The other thing we do, and I think this is important, is we put a lot of effort into the production side of things. Yeah. We have a very different model where we work really hard with our journalists to get their copy up to scratch.
Finally.
And then what we do is we pair that journalism, the sort of reporting, with visuals and high quality design.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that the better the quality of the design, the more likely you as a reader are going to trust that news, because you think, okay, something that looks this good must also be true.
Yeah.
But the other part of it is that people's brains work in different ways.
Yeah.
And so if you are just writing stories and publishing text, you are going to reach some people, but you're going to alienate a lot of people whose brains work in different ways. I'm one of those who need visuals.
Yeah,
I struggle with big pages of text. And so we put just as much emphasis on photography and illustration and cartooning as we do on the reporting itself.
This is incredible. And it brings me to my next question, which is, you as the continent have been at the forefront of covering what has now been branded All Eyes on Wagner. Or is it Wagner? I think it's pronounced Wagner. And part of the reason why I'm so passionate about reflecting the continent beyond South African borders is the similarities in what we as a people are going through. And the influence of Russia has become such an important aspect of our lives here on the continent. Tell us about firstly, the disinformation campaign that is allegedly pegged at around 7 million euros. And then also we'll move on to this recruitment of these kids to fight in the Russia-Ukraine war. So let's start with the Wagner group, which obviously didn't die with its leader.
So our editor-in-chief, Lydia Namubiru, received some documents a few months ago. And the documents show that there is a Russian entity, a company operating out of St. Petersburg.
Called The Company, actually.
That's what they refer to themselves internally.
Yeah.
And they have been putting millions of euros into disinformation efforts in Africa, particularly targeting
South Africa.
Including South Africa. Looking at places like Burkina Faso, Mali, Tanzania.
Central African Republic
is big.
The heart of it all.
And South Africa.
Yep.
And
why? Just tell us a little. Let's start with Wagner. Tell us the link between Wagner and the Russian state.
So the
intelligence.
Wagner group was performing a really valuable service to the Russian state, which was, it was doing not just, private security or mercenary operations, but also these influence and narrative change operations, disinformation, fake news, trying to shift opinions. And when Prigozhin was killed, and the Wagner group, as it was, ended, it kind of, the same people, the same sort of networks just rebirthed themselves in a different form. And that's what we are exploring in this new investigation. And I think that it's not going to go away. Even if this entity were to close, another one will spring up, because there is such a narrative fight going on at the moment across the world, but particularly in Africa. One of the manifestations of this is in Burkina Faso, the junta leader, Ibrahim Traore, and the contrasting sort of clash of narratives about, is he the new Thomas Sankara? Is he the liberator, the freedom fighter? Or is he, a military coup leader and a human rights abuser? And all of these things feel very central to the broader geopolitics of this moment.
Yeah, and Russia has been very much involved in the Sahel, in those countries that have basically broken off from ECOWAS.
It has, but what I would say, of course, is Russia's not alone. France has also been, funding influence operations for decades. The United States puts a lot of money into media, and I should declare that one of our funders is the National Endowment for Democracy, which is affiliated with the United States. We don't accept any editorial oversight, obviously, but the sources of funding for journalism across Africa are minimal. And what that does is it puts newsrooms into vulnerable positions where they do have to take money from somebody in order to do the work that they want to do. So the question then becomes, who are they taking money from? Are there appropriate safeguards in place? And then what is the quality of the journalism that is outputted? But it is
the money influencing the narrative?
It's a really tricky space to navigate.
So basically, Wagner is trying to place the narrative in a positive slant, or place a positive slant towards the Russian narrative on the African continent. And why is it important? I mean, it's like the scramble for Africa continues, basically.
It feels like that. It feels like, Africa is a hugely important piece on the geopolitical chessboard. And the various superpowers sort of see it that way, see it as a place where they can get control of whether it's rare earth minerals, whether it's diplomatic support through the UN, whether it's access to other kinds of mining. It feels very transactional in nature. And I think what our reporting over the last 5 or 6 years has shown pretty conclusively is that none of the superpowers have Africa's interests at heart, or the interests of Africans.
Africa and its leaders
and so
themselves?
That's where we get to the difficult questions. And this is also part of our reporting, is what are our institutions doing to protect us? What is the African Union doing? What are our presidents saying? And the answer to those questions is pretty unsatisfactory, I think.
Because you see now at least 36 or more countries have had their youth recruited to fight in the Ukraine-Russia war. And what you're hearing from African leaders is condemnation of the recruiters, but never condemnation of Vladimir Putin. Those people are going to fight on Russia's side, recruited by Russia.
That is the most extreme example of a broader and more disturbing trend, which is that one of Africa's primary values from the perspective of other foreign powers is for its labor, for its people. Getting cheap, vulnerable, easily exploitable labor to build stadiums in Qatar for the World Cup, or to be domestic helpers in places like Lebanon and Saudi Arabia, or, in extreme examples, to go literally and fight on the front lines of someone else's wars. And that is only going to increase as we see demographics across the world change. Western countries their birth rates are declining. Africa is going to have more and more young people needing jobs, needing to find work. And what we're seeing
because
is
the work is not being created in their own countries by their own governments.
And what we're seeing is a couple of things. One is a brain drain, where, at the higher levels, our nurses, our carers, our teachers, our doctors, we're training them and they are going off to work in other countries. But we're also seeing this vulnerable, unskilled workers going to other places and receiving no protections.
Yeah.
In particular, there was a fantastic New York Times article last year on how the Kenyan government was actually complicit in sending its own people to the Gulf states, knowing that they were going into exploitative conditions.
It's quite rife in East Africa, because in Uganda, I know they actually have contracts with some of these states to send people.
It's one of the things we, I think, as a continent have to take really seriously is how do we protect our workers overseas? How do we prevent our people from being, picked up on employment contracts and then taken into, a lot of the Russian...
Well, create the employment. I mean, that's one solution.
That would be number one. Absolutely. Yeah. The reason that it's so important for us to be telling our own stories as a continent is to provide a source to combat the disinformation, to provide publications with reliable reputations that are credible, that people can trust, so that when people are facing difficult questions like, can I trust this institution? Can I trust this offer that's been made to me? That they have places to go where they can rely on the information they are receiving. And there are not enough of those. And in fact, what we're seeing across Africa, but also across the world, actually, is journalism is under immense attack. Media houses are under attack. South Africa is a great example where, we can talk about disinformation efforts as much as we like, but the truth is, even locally, we're seeing media houses die, newspapers die, or be hollowed out. Newspapers that once had 40, 50, 60 staff now have 3 or 4 staff. And that is, to me, an urgent priority to fix, because in the absence of those kinds of credible media institutions, there is nothing to stop anyone's disinformation from flourishing and from creating real serious harm.
And it seems to spread faster than the truth, doesn't it? And isn't that where your model of journalism comes in? Because it is a model that looked at where the people are and how to reach them.
So on the African continent, WhatsApp is by far the most significant social media platform. Because unlike Instagram or Facebook or Twitter, it is the place where people talk to people they know. So it's where you have your family group or your church group or your work group, and you generally are talking to people that you have a relationship with. And what that means is when you share information on that platform, you are sharing it with people who are primed to believe the information that they receive, because they're getting it from someone they know. It's not just broadcasting out into the universe. And so this sort of phenomenon has been exploited by people who push fake news and disinformation. They very carefully put information onto WhatsApp because they know it can spread very quickly. We saw this a lot in the beginning stages of the pandemic, where things like, steam inhalation can cure COVID, went rife on WhatsApp long before it got to any news websites. So what we wanted to do at the continent was figure out a way to put news onto that platform, because news organizations have not been putting news onto WhatsApp. They haven't been designing news for the most significant social media platform on this continent and probably in the world. And that seems crazy to me. So we thought we would try this model that we borrowed from 263 Chat. And it really works. It turns out when you reach people where they are, our readers have kind of done the work for us. We haven't had to do any marketing or advertising. Our growth has been entirely word of mouth. So we share it with you, and then you share it with your family. And then they share it with their friends, and suddenly, in my head, I think of it sometimes as a Ponzi scheme, but for news.
A good Ponzi scheme.
A good Ponzi scheme.
A good investment.
Yes.
And as a result, I believe that you are the most widely distributed newspaper in Africa.
Yes. So we have subscribers in every single African country, which we're really proud of, and a weekly circulation of about 150,000 readers.
Wow.
And I think that we're hoping that this is just the first phase. And as the world gets even more complicated and even more chaotic, audiences are going to start more actively looking for places that they can find reliable information. And when they do, we want to be there for them.
And tell me, how is it doing in South Africa? Because there is that newsroom, I don't know if I can call it a myth or a belief that Africa's a hard sell.
You know, I've never bought into that. And it's a good thing, because my entire career has been as a reporting on Africa, mostly for South African newsrooms.
Yeah, people will remember you from Mail and Guardian. Yeah.
And
Daily
what
Maverick.
we've found is that there is an interest from South African audiences. So our largest market for the continent is South Africa.
Okay, that's good news.
We have more readers in South Africa than in any other country. And I think that's because there is a widespread interest. It may not be an enormously popular one, but it's significant. And the kinds of people who are interested are generally people in some kind of position of authority or ability to make decisions. So they're really important people to reach. But the other side of it is, I think that, you know, our model is kind of predicated on getting people to tell their own stories. So if we are reporting on Eastern DRC, it's not me flying in and writing whatever I think I know about Goma. It's finding someone in Goma who can write the story for us and then supporting them to get it published.
So parachute journalism,
exactly.
Basically.
And I think that kind of flip in the approach not only creates, I think, much better journalism, it also resonates more, because audiences who read that, who understand the context, will see that and be like, oh, these guys get us.
Yeah.
And then when they read the story about Sudan, and they don't know about Sudan, but they're going to trust us because we've got the story about Goma right. Yeah. And that's what we've kind of tried to do. And the truth is, it's not always the fastest way to grow, but it is the most solid way to grow. So after 5 years, we know that we've got this core audience of people who are reading us every week, who are sharing it in their networks. And where this becomes really important is it's increasingly difficult to know where to access reliable information and which platforms you can access reliable information on. We're also seeing platforms like Facebook and Instagram, and increasingly WhatsApp, becoming more interventionist in what information they do prioritize or not prioritize, which of course is a huge issue,
concern.
Potentially.
Yeah.
So we think we're in a great position because we're reasonably sure if we were to tell our audience at the continent, look, guys, WhatsApp is not it anymore. We can't give you, this is not the place for reliable information. We need you to move to Signal or somewhere else. We think that we'd be able to take enough people with us in a way that allows us to keep sending reliable information and avoiding the kind of algorithmic interference or government interference that we're kind of seeing from both sides at the moment.
You'll certainly be taking me with you. Thank you so very much, Simon, for joining us. We really do appreciate it, and we appreciate your work and the work of your team.
Thank you. It's really been a pleasure.